we'll get started. I think I've covered everything in logistics. In case I missed, I will come back. So let's get started. Introductions. I've spoken a lot. I haven't told many of you who are new. I'm Ishita Shah. I'm trained as a designer and a historian, and I'm facilitating these workshops. That's enough for now. Anything more you want to know, we'll chat some other time. So I'm going to pass it on.
All right, so good morning and Kalai Vanakkam, everybody. My name is Beena and I am from Bangalore. I have been in Bangalore most of my life. The reason I say this is because I firmly identify as somebody from the South. I have never had any doubt about that. I find that this doubt came up in the minds of my cousins who some of them born and brought up in the global north. Now, how that connects to what I have to share with you is I have one branch of my family, some distant. Um, some of them were, I'm going to use a very controversial word here, converted, all right, to a different form of spirituality or thinking, which through the generations has resulted in this global thinking that we have today. I have so many records by my great grandfather, who is actually critical to my thinking today. He was revered as somebody. He was revered as somebody who could, you know, recite verses from a certain book backward. And I, as a child of the 2022 generation, post age of information, I have obviously very strong feelings about this because I feel that I was denied so much of my culture growing up. That is why I'm here today, because all the material that has been left behind by him, this is the critical thing, not by his wife. I want to talk to his wife. I want to know what her thoughts were. Did she want to have 13 children? Was it her choice? Why is her name not even mentioned? As a woman today, I have very strong feelings, and that's one of the reasons I'm here, because I want to know if other people have the same kind of interest as I have in this. I might also mention that a book that has recently been hitting the charts, India, Bharat, and Pakistan, by a person who's a lawyer in the Supreme Court called J. Sai Deepak. He has articulated this thinking much better than I can ever do, and that's the reason I'm here.
A very good morning to all of you. I am Radhika Hegde, and I have also been here in Bangalore all my life. I'm working in St. John's Medical College. I'm a historian by training. So I would not call myself a historian, but a student of history as such. And getting into St. John's actually opened up an entire new thinking for me. Before I was just a student of history who enjoyed going to archives for a typical purpose to research, for my papers or for my projects. It was very, very straightforward. But then I go to St. John's, and this entire new thing is just given to me, saying that you're now supposed to handle a museum, an archive, a library, along with the projects that you do. So this is how I started learning more about how to manage an archive. And I think I'll be talking more about it in my presentation. But it's nice to be here today because Ishita and I have spoken so much of coming together, but something or the other usually crops up. Either it's the in-laws, or it's the parents, or it's the children. But today, because it's in Bangalore, I was able to make it, and I made sure that the rains cannot stop me. And I started home at around 7:30 so that I can reach early here. So yeah, kudos to myself that I made it. Thank you, Ishita. Thanks for inviting us.
Hi everyone, I'm Rukmini. I was with Amita in batch. And it's strange to actually meet you in person. And you definitely look different from what I remember in the, on camera. So it is nice with the strange distortion. So I also studied history for my bachelor's, and then I went on to doing arts and aesthetics. And of late, the past 2 years, I've been engaged with textile history and just and trying to figure out, what interests people in saris and why they buy it or what colors they buy and how does it change. So that's been fun. Um, I stumbled upon this archiving thing, I think in 2020 when first that series had started, and through that, I think I realized that I'm also interested in public housing as well as the aesthetics of it. And that's something that I explored in a very introductory way through these archiving sessions. And yeah, that's mainly it. And hopefully you'll get to know more about me and all about through our presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Deepti. This is Agastya. I have to introduce him because he claimed he's going to have more fun and he's more excited than I am to be the presenter here today. So I'm a photographer and the archiving project absolutely came out as a because I actually wanted to archive my personal documentary work when I first wrote the proposal to Ishita. And then I realized this is so much more a personal engagement, and that's why I had to pick up a more personal project. And it has been beautiful. Archiving is not as daunting as I thought it was. Once I went for the workshop, that is, yeah. So I hope all of you fun doing.
So, hello everyone. So yeah, this is my second session in the second edition of Curating for Culture, and I started out by documenting Navratri in my hometown. It was just out of curiosity. It was something that I had experienced in my childhood, and I felt that when I moved to Bangalore, I missed that a lot. And I miss folk culture in urban cities, and that was the impetus to start. I did not what I was. I didn't expect what I was. I didn't know what I was getting into, and it was. Yeah, it was like the only way I can see it. Is that if you go and like disturb a beehive, and like poof, there was like so much information that just came up. The first part of my work ended up as a film, but there is still a lot of information that I'm sitting on, and so that's why I'm here, and hopefully I'll know how to put that information out.
Hi, my name is Tanika, and so I'm at a very initial stage of what I'm looking to create some kind of a manual on urban greening. And so for that, we were interested in looking at how people relate to trees and how in the past as well, people have connected to trees and just stories of relationships with trees. I also really love trees myself, so it would be interesting to look into this. So I'm here more to understand how archiving works and just to learn more about the process and just learn from all of you and see what archiving can do to, looking at these sources can do to a project. So yeah.
All right, over to the team online. Who wants to start? Aparna?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Aparna, and so I work in design as an educator. I teach at the Goethe-Institut of Design in Bangalore. I also run a creative writing and publishing program for children where I launch child authors. And Of late, I've been working a lot on the concept of memory. That has been a very sort of a robust engagement for me, and I'm on the conference circuit for that. And with respect to memory and why I'm here today and in the previous session is that I'm increasingly interested in archiving memories in order to preserve certain family narratives, and also to preserve anecdotes and facts and lived histories. It's like a living histories project, because in my family, a lot of forefathers have lived across the country, and they have lived through certain historical movements, such as I mean, not just partition, but also say some people recall the Bengal famine. There was the Sharda Act. So I also want to, catalog these events and, present a narrative through, the lens of lived history. So that's why I'm here, to know how to consolidate this further, and what is the best way to preserve and archive.
Yamini, do you want to go on?
Yeah, hi. Good morning, everyone. I'm joining in from Pune. So I teach in a university. I'm currently working on this project of archiving the Deccan. I work on Deccan history. So, and we see that Deccan has it works with a lot of languages, which is Marathi, Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, but the archives don't necessarily speak to the region as such. And as a group of historians, we've began this small project of archiving the region. And mostly it is for now historical documents and maybe visual material as well, more sort of documentary evidence. But we are planning to also work with oral histories and things. At the moment, I'm working with a series of magazines from 1930s, which had several of these cultural, artistic, political discussions about the region. These are all in Urdu. So I'm working with that material to begin with. Yeah, that's.
Thank you, Yamini. We'll move on to Sharon.
Hi everyone, I am from Mumbai. My name is Sharon. I'm currently working with Azim Premji University. So here we are trying to work on storybooks for children about the lakes and the tanks that were there in Bangalore. So for that, because I don't have any experience in this area, I've been a teacher and well researcher, but not so much of what is really necessary here. My team suggested that I should maybe this will help me out. So here I am.
Wonderful. So you must be on leave right now. That's why you're in Mumbai. I mean, on holiday.
No, actually, so mine is work from home. So yeah.
Oh, APU also has that. Interesting.
Yes.
Kaustav, do you want to go next? I know, Kaustav, you just rejoined, but if you're able to hear us.
Hello.
Yes. Hi.
Yeah. So I'm Kaustav Chatterjee. Did my master's from University of Hyderabad in painting discipline. So I'm working on family archive actually. So yeah, my ongoing project is on evolution of contemporary middle class in Bengal. So yeah, it's happening like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sony, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Soni, and I am from Ulhasnagar, which is a small town outside Mumbai, but it's a very big Sindhi township in India. This was the place where a lot of Sindhis were moved to after the partition. Currently, I am in Andhra Pradesh, in the non-existing capital called Amravati, and I teach in the Department of English at a university here, SRM AP. And what brings me here is my work on Sindhi books. I have spent years running away from my identity, from my roots. For me, my linguistic ethnicity has been a burden, It has been about Sindhis being stereotyped or, internalizing the fact that there is nothing exciting or nothing interesting about Sindhis. You can't even name one famous Sindhi. Apart from a few odd filmmakers who also do not look like they are Sindhi. So, but in the recent times, I've been thinking about why I feel so disconnected from my language and my community. And I realized that one of the reasons for that disconnect is that I do not have access to knowledge in Sindhi, and I do not have access to aesthetic pleasure in Sindhi. Um, and I've been taking this very seriously. I've been working towards it in some bits, small moments of realization that I've had in the recent times. One is that I worked on Sindhi post-partition Sindhi writing, translated Sindhi writing for my MPhil research. Then I translated a little bit from Sindhi into English. Then I moved on to learning the Arabic, Perso-Arabic script itself. And then I began to look for Sindhi books, because now that I was learning the alphabets, I needed, some sort of reading material also to help myself learn further. And but all of it got a very big push thanks to, getting to know Ishita in a very different context. And I am now working towards, formally or informally archiving it in as many ways as possible. And as and when the opportunity arises, I'll talk about what are the ideas that I have in terms of archiving, about archiving Sindhi books and Sindhi literature. And I look forward to your inputs and your insights as to how this can be done better. Thank you.
Thank you, Soli. Tonisha?
I'm Tonisha. I teach at the School of Liberal Arts at IIT Jodhpur. My work has looked at identity and space in very close ways. In this project, I am focusing on digital archiving around the Sundarban area in West Bengal, if you've heard about it. This deltaic region. Amitav Ghosh's literature is, of course, a big introduction to it. I'm focusing on local knowledge systems around it. So in the previous workshop, we were talking about storytelling workshops with children as a way of working on it. And that is, I think, the document that was also shared with the other participants. We then identified that step one is building the local legends and other lores into a digital repository so that those kinds of storytelling workshops can happen. In the work, the focus is on challenging a kind of politics of representation. When it comes to spaces like these, mainstream representations take up a lot of space. Local knowledges, local lores, local communities are often ignored. And not just talking about the ways in which these gaps exist, but how they lead to certain kinds of stereotyping. So I looked at ghost stories around Sundarbans, especially in young adult literature, to see how the ghost or the monster is being created. These are certain key concerns that I have been trying to work with. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll go back. Debankita, are you able to hear us? And unmute yourself? Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead, please. Yes.
Hello, I'm Devankita, and currently I'm doing my MPhil in ancient history at University of Hyderabad. My work primarily focuses on tracing the Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb of Hyderabad city. Due to lack of sources and accessibility, after much deliberation and discussions, I'm focusing on a theater, Kadir Ali Bagh Theater Foundation, and tracing the journey from there, tracing the journey of Hyderabad's art and culture in Nizam and post-Nizam period, and like linking the city's history, art, culture, basically Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb or culture from there. Yeah.
Thank you. Dhruva, do you want to share as well how you are here?
Hi everyone, I'm Dhruva. I run an online archival platform called lekha.cc. I hope to be working with Ishita in the future, so I'm just dropping by to see what your archives are about and about the session itself.
Okay, I'll add to that. So the upcoming workshop in the space, we will have Dhruva with us. So that's the collaboration we're looking forward to. And that's why we wanted to know what archives we are all building, and then how can Lekha Archives work with the platform with all of us. Nijum, do you want to try and unmute?
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. This is Nijum from Bangladesh, and I'm the archivist currently in Victoria's Trust, and I'm mentored in last year by Ishita. So I want to work on the artist archive, and uh, I specifically I want to develop two artists, work on two artists journey in early 90s and late 80s, and about their activities in Bangladesh, and try to figure out that what is the condition in Bangladesh in that time, and how my selected artists are Taba Begum Lipi and Mahbubur Rahman, and my focus is that how their journey shape their future journey and create a significant position in Bangladesh. That's how we can look forward to a different journey with academic and non-academic perspective. So this is my archival project for this CPA 2022 workshop, and this is about me.
Thank you so much, Nijum. Srinidhi, over to you.
Hi, this is Nidhi Prahlad. Yeah, so I curate a museum nearby. We have a museum and an archive and a gallery in another called a museum. It's the opposite of a museum in a way because you kind of get to touch and feel and be your own curator. We give kind of clues so that you get a little heads up tools to um, work with the archives and work with the objects in the museum, but we don't curate and put a curatorial note telling this is its history. So currently for this workshop, I've got my grandfather's old trunk, Virgin Archive. I've just worked through some of his letters, and that was really cathartic for me because I think family archives are really underrated in the context of mental health. So I had, yeah, yeah. No, I'm going to again shock you now. So it's like, yeah. So my grand uncle used to bully me as Ganji. Ganji means porridge in Kannada, which is supposed to be eaten by the poor, but today it's a superfood or whatever. But I, because we were relatively poorer compared to extended branches of our Savarna family, and I was really traumatized with my grand uncle calling me that throughout childhood. And then I come across these letters when he has supposedly run away from home for like 20 years or whatever, and the family has excommunicated him, and he's living hand to mouth in Mumbai and writing these pleading letters to my stupid grandfather who isn't really helping him. Right here in HL, there is this East Horizon Engineering College or whatever. He's like, this college has opened up. Can you get me a job? And then he writes again, okay, you are some author. I'll sell all of your books in Mumbai. I really don't know what my grandfather kept responding. I need to still dig through to figure those clues, but certainly doesn't seem like he did the bidding. And therefore, that intergenerational trauma was born onto me as a kid because of all these whatever stupid family stories were happening. So even though I won't be able to forgive him, at least I'm able to contextualize that bullying. So there is one small thing that I figured, but there's a lot of other interesting stuff in this. So I was too impatient with my ADHD to kind of really do a very good job. Don't kill me now with conservation. So I just used a hammer and broke it open because I couldn't get the key. So I just randomly have opened it up, which I would not do if I had attended the conservation workshop, I guess. So yeah, that's about the kind of work that we're doing.
I'm just laughing and I'm saying because I'm not trained as a archivist by degree or by profession, is why I think my attitude to these projects is also a little more. I don't think the word is lenient, but a little more open-minded in terms of what has to be done has to be done. I think we all have spoken about this a lot because when CPA even began, we were all sitting in pandemic. So what were those high standards for, right? And what those memories and family histories did at that time wouldn't have happened if we had those state-of-the-art practices to follow. Having said that, one also understands that this is not only about an approach in terms of an academician or an archivist or a curator, it's also very much subject to resources. So if I'm sitting in an institution, we're setting up SEPT archives, yes, the first sentence we have always written is state of the art, because it's the first archive for architecture. We want people to give in material. When the tables turn around and when you're working with your own thing, your approach does change because you don't have the wherewithal, the money, and conservation budgets go in lakhs and crores. So no moralistic ideas over there. What is possible, and hence what we talk about is a lot preventive conservation, which Beena and I attended it again with MAP, is to say that can we start with taking care of the material in a way where it doesn't get damaged. Then we'll talk about conserving it. But first, what can we do in terms of taking care of it? I think we even spoke about it when I came to SJRI, that let's first preserve it for what it is. And then, yes, if we have the money, if we have the grant, then we can always think about putting in few more bucks and restoring the paper or restoring the box or the bag. Because paper itself is lakhs. I don't know what this restoration of the bag would cost you. So conservation is not on the top list. We have to be very realistic when we talk about archiving in South Asia, I feel. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to do a quick recap for those who are new, just 5 slides. So that's me presenting. And then I'll hand it over to our CPA 2020 edition pros now. Yes. So just give me 2 minutes to present and then I'll hand it. Okay. So recap for all of those who are new, what had happened. We had started working with some smaller workshops, 15 days, 7 days, then 11 days, then 15 days on family archiving. This was a very personal response to the pandemic. I didn't know what to do in those days. And I wanted to help. I wanted to make my understanding of practice make some sense in those times. But what happened over 3 or 4 iterations is we actually found people with really fulfilling or substantial projects or materials and things to do. So in what intention of those 15-day or the shorter workshop was to build proposals, give an overview of archiving as a process, what all steps you need to take care of, how do you basically identify the material or where can you source it from, especially even in those shorter workshops, thinking of people sitting inside the houses and during the pandemic. So how can they connect with their family members? What will it mean for a family member to open up or a community member to open up about certain incidences and events? But people had time. That was the key understanding. People built proposals then, and then we got feedback saying that we hope this was longer, we hope this was more immersive. So we ended up doing a 6-month-long incubation program. We started with 4, it became 6, thanks to the enthusiasm of the participants who had joined us. And what over there we had planned for was very straightforward 4 steps, which are very critical to building any kind of archiving project, which starts with collecting archives or documentation or digitization, which is why we are meeting here today. We move on to information management or record management and describing your archival data for access for other participants or other researchers. You move on from there to building stories and narratives. So you sort of shift gears from being a archivist to being a curator or a researcher, depends. And then final version was to think about creative visualization and possibilities. So another important approach, because perhaps I'm a non-trained archivist, is constantly to think about archives as a form of use, as a form of public engagement. So every workshop, every discussion has always been around, but what can people do with it? What will the world do with it? What will you do so that the world is interested in this? So even in those workshops, it was important to bring in, we had 4 different facilitators. So the last one, we brought in Sarita Sundar, who has been working with different kinds of histories and visualizing historical narratives in different outputs and formats. And so did the participants do that. Alongside, we obviously had open dialogues with a lot of archiving practitioners who came in and spoke, shared their projects and their difficulties, of course, and internal mentoring sessions with me on oral history recording or on curatorial practices. What that led to is a 3-stepped outcome of the program. First, we went out and we said, let's do a public finale. Thanks to the enthusiasm of all the 18 participants who survived the 6 months. That is how it became 6 months. But more also importantly, thanks to the workshop facilitators who came back on board and they moderated these 4 panel discussions. They gave it the themes. So we spoke about migration and memory. We spoke about personal and political. We spoke about engendering the archive, and we spoke about stories wandering out with Anuja. We also have all of these resources edited and uploaded on YouTube, as expected. Or maybe not. But yeah, we are very keen on keeping all the material open access. So all the lectures and all the talks are accessible. So from this point, especially it is useful in this version of CPA 2022 when we are only meeting to talk about the key aspects of each step. So that is when it will be very useful if some of you reach out and say, oh, listen, I want to spend more time in doing this bit of the exercise. We can guide you to some of these resources rather than repeating or, turning the wheel again and again. And finally, yes, we also did a compendium. For those who are here, I put it out on the table. For those who are online, I'll put the link in the chat. But this is the first self-published compendium that we made of all the projects coming together. Each participant wrote for themselves, and we just curated the publication. And it reached about 70, 80 different institutions and individuals who were interested, who asked for a copy through crowdfunding. This was an extended opportunity where we put the proposal through and it became an exhibition in Delhi called Kitchen to Kacheri. And now it was not really only about the 20 participants who had joined us, but the 40, 60 of them who had written to us earlier. So we reached out to all of them through a call for proposal, and they sent their archives to us to Delhi. So coming back to when we talk about conservation and preservation, we have taken these kind of leaps as well, where we have worked with individual archivists and we have made ways that material can move around even without an institutional or a more scientific setup in terms of conservation. Of course, very simple things like the most fragile things will not be moved around, but what are the most basic material available? It might be available in Delhi, but maybe not in Gorakhpur. So what else can be done? And we have always creatively played around with these. You can find out about each of these steps more on our website if you want to. And then here we are in edition 2. And I think what is very fascinating to me, especially seeing the 2 editions, is the kind of projects have changed. We are all, some of us at least, are talking about a cause, or some of us are working towards thought for art. And some of us are looking for alternative stories, as first Beena introduced and now Srinidhi introduced. So it's very different that it's the same edition or the same kind of a program, but the approach to archiving and histories or personal narratives has already changed over the 2 years. And I want to believe the pandemic or no pandemic has something to do with it, but we'll know over the months. So I leave you all with that.
Right. So I have introduced myself. What I'm going to do today is a very simple thing that I started with, and how it kind of overtook this entire identity of mine, where I had to recreate myself, not just as a person who's working on research papers and projects, but also a person who's actually kind of conserving the archives that we started getting in the institution. So this is my journey, what I'm going to talk to you all today. This is the story of the archives, from how it started from the institutional archives, and I moved to the micro level, that is the family archives. So to begin with, as I told you all before, I work in St. John's, and we have this very beautiful museum called as the S.L. Bhatia History of Medicine Museum. This was started by this very interesting man called as Major General S.L. Bhatia, who was a visionary and who wanted to set up this museum throughout India. But of course, he did not have much support. So he came to St. John's, and he met the dean there, Dr. Louis Montero, and actually said that I'm going to set up this museum with the collections that I have, and I will make sure that this museum is supported from my own private property. So a trust was created, and the museum was supposed to be sustained from what he had contributed. That is, a private property, the rent that the St. John's would get from a private property in Hyderabad, Jubilee Hills, as well as one in Bangalore. But over a period, St. John's managed to sell it, and his wife got really pissed off, and then she did not give us anything after that. So we have managed to sustain from the grants that we get, a little bit from here and there, as well as philanthropy. My position was created as a permanent position in the college, and my salary is sustained by the college. But otherwise, we need to raise everything on our own and see to it that this museum kind of sustains. So what do we have in the museum? We have these amazing instruments, some of which are almost 100 years old. We have the papers of Major General S.L. Bhatia itself. He was in a position where, you know, he actually set up this entire health system in Hyderabad. Once the Britishers moved away, and once it was taken up by the Indian government, the government realized that Hyderabad did not have a good health system when compared to Mysore. So everything had to be started, and Major General Bhatia played a very, very important role there as well as in Madras. So he was a visionary to an extent that every speech that he gave, he actually managed to make 2 or 3 copies of it, and this entire lot came to us. So this was the first archive with which I started working. Although in the beginning I had this very notion saying that, okay, this is an elite man who has a very one way of looking at health as such. But as I started immersing myself in his huge archives, that is, we have his papers from 1920, from his days in Cambridge to how he settled in Bangalore. Then I realized the kind of initiatives that he had taken. With privilege comes responsibility. So he took up this responsibility very seriously, and these papers were published. So this kind of fascinated me, and I started cataloging these papers because this was not cataloged before. Very simple cataloging system. As I had told you before, I'm a historian. I did not know anything about cataloging. We historians are so privileged. We go to the archives, we pick up these papers, demand these papers, and if the archivists don't give us, we actually say that this is public property and how can you, not give us. But we do not realize the extent of the archives. If you go to the KSA archives in Bangalore, you'll actually realize it. So when I started doing it slowly, I started realizing that this is like a huge task, and some kind of simple training for me is required. But by the time I thought about it and things started, falling into place, I started doing this basic archiving. The pandemic hit. I'll come to that. But you can see the different kinds of archives we have. You see the doctors here treating the patient. This is from the. This is a group of doctors who were sent from St. John's to Bangladesh. So we have this one doctor who curated this entire set, and he has now given it to us. So he's seen to it that all this has been put in album. It has been named. Everything was done. But of course, when MAP came to kind of look at our resources, they said that the conservation has not been done properly, and you need to start from the scratch again. Basics of which they told us, and we started with the limited resource we have. We started cleaning up things, dusting things, because we had a lot of microfiche and those kinds of problems. So we have started from the basics. This is what I want to tell you all. We are a huge museum, a huge archive, a limited space, definitely. But we have to start everything from the basics. So these are some of the questions that came to me when I started working with the archives. How should I approach this material itself that has come to us? Boxes and boxes were kept. It was all over the space. How can I start, dividing this? What are some of the first steps that I can take? Conservation is something that, people keep talking about. But I started calling people, and conservation is a very expensive business. Somebody actually quoted 25 lakhs for the books that we wanted to conserve, and now I cannot even take this proposal to St. John's. So I just kept quiet there. What did we do? I went through some of the YouTube videos and we created these small homemade boxes with some neem leaves and some camphor and everything else, and started keeping the books there. It actually worked. We got some grain bags. We put the books in there. These are the simple things that we started doing, and amazingly the housekeeping staff helped us a lot because they were very fascinated with what was going on. So the stakeholders here, actually, it's from me, it became a fascination and something that that people started sharing with what I was doing, especially the housekeeping staff. And gratefully, and I'm so grateful to them, because our conservation process starts with them. And if I don't do something also in Kannada, they come and say, Radhamma, yen ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ? ಸರಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಹಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡು. This is the first step. So I'm very sure now that if I leave, there is somebody who will actually, take ownership to what is on. The second one is, does the archive hold any large historical value? Again, when we are looking at government records and when you go to the archives, there is this particular kind of archive that you're always looking at. And in your head, it's always like, okay, this is going to add great historical value to what you're doing. But what about the academic papers that have come to me of these doctors? How is it going to help anybody? Because all these are there online. But then again, as and when I started immersing with the archives that we have, there was some kind of value that was there. I'll come to it again. How can I arrange this extensive data in a way that will communicate my idea to the people? This is the biggest question with which I actually started looking for some kind of a workshop that can actually help lay foundation to what I was planning to do. Just by looking at basic information, because we get requests from people who are working in the field of history of medicine from Harvard to Hyderabad, from UK. We've got one request from Netherlands also to send us a paper. But then you cannot send an entire archive. How can you catalog it in a simple way that just by reading the title and a little bit of description that they understand what we have in the archive, that is there all the way in Bangalore without visiting it. So is it necessary to personalize an archive that is by nature academic? In essence, the archive that we have in St. John's is very academic in nature. So can I personalize it, in some way that, it will add some kind of a human touch to it or value to it? Because you're looking at scientists and researchers and they are very adamant in the way they present the data. 2 + 2 is always 4. You think somewhere, then you do not belong to this field. So this was something that was playing in my mind when I was actually looking at the data. And then the COVID-19 pandemic hit. I was one of the first people to actually get COVID, and I was in the hospital for a very long time. I came back home. 6 months you're sitting at home, and then you feel and you see people do. So yes, the COVID-19 pandemic. 6 months you're sitting at home. Everybody is doing this wonderful thing. You can see so many people cooking. I was not able to get up from bed. I was not able to walk around much. And the entire family is in home. So there are a lot of these emotional things that's going on. How do you deal with such thing? And then in the back of your mind, you know that our hospital and our college is working. I had taken a leave. And then I was like, okay, I think it's time for me to take a pause with whatever I'm doing, relook and reassess. It was an existential question that I was having, basically. So all this actually led me to look for a short-term workshop which can actually help me, take a pause and relook and reassess. This is when I actually came across Ishita's workshop in one of the Facebook groups. I connected with her and she said, yes, I think from next week we are starting. You can actually send us a short proposal and we can start with it. And this is how I actually started. The reason for me was very clear. And I came with a very straight, I want to learn how to archive. In 15 days, I will learn and then I'm a pro. So this is how I actually started working with Ishita as such. And this was like one. When I started it, Ishita is talking about personal archives, and I'm like, oh God, personal archives. I was thinking of institutional archives, and now we are coming to the personal part of it. This is that's when I proposed to Ishita, saying that I'll work on this, and she's like, why don't you look at something personal? And people started presenting their personal story, and this is how I went back to my family history. I have been in, my family has been in the South from a very long time, and we have kind of a very straightforward. Our stories are documented very well through oral histories because I'm from South Canada, that is from the Urpi belt. So very clearly, from the father to the son, as well as from grandmother to the granddaughter, our stories have been passed out and documented in such a manner. And then when I started looking back and I started talking to my father that I'm very interested in understanding the story of my family, he said, yeah, but we have this style factory which was created in the 1920s. And like, oh yes, this is there. And then very we know very less of it. Although we would hear stories from my grandmother, because the properties in our families are actually passed from mother to daughter. Yeah. So this was actually passed to my grandmother. So, but my grandmother was not in a very good state of mind to talk. But then I had my uncles and my father who actually started talking to me about this. Slowly, I started collecting data, and this is how we broke open a cupboard, which was not opened, I think, in 60 or 70 years. And that's how the tile of the 1920s style was already there. But some of the records that was kept by the Masries at that point in time was also brought out. And this is how I started actually talking more to people about the family history that we have. Although I will definitely say that I have not gone beyond this because I was not able to visit the place, and as well as pandemic and other things happened. But definitely, I would like to work on this someday because it is not just the history of one family, but the history of Tile Factory is the story of many families around South India. It was the lifeline of many people. This was something that was given to, it was usually done in joint collaboration with the Britishers as well as the native people. So there is a multiple level of engagements that can be done. So from here, of course, things started moving, and then I joined back to St. John's, came with new set of ideas of how things can actually be done. And the first thing that I learned in all the workshops that I managed to attend with Ishita was cataloging is very, very important. Even at the institutional level, how cataloging becomes important with the limited, because cataloging does not take much. It requires a little bit of your time and an Excel sheet. So I started actually cataloging simple in a manner that I could understand, which I thought people could understand what I have written. And this is the archives. We had some amount of money where we could actually box the sources that we had. And this was also a time where I started taking printouts just to, name the boxes. Box 1 will contain this, box 2 will contain. Simple cataloging actually helps a lot. So this is what I learned in the workshop, and this helped me in creating data. So after this, there were people who actually came to us and visited our library and archives. They were very impressed with the kind of, data that we were collecting and were happy, and they started giving us their archives. So we have Dr. Shirish Kawadi, who is one of an academic who is in Pune right now, but was very fascinated with the way that we were handling our objects. And he said, I will give my entire archives to you. And his academic archives, not the personal archives, but the academic archives are now stored in St. John's. So he has worked on public health in Bombay, as well as philanthropic organizations around India, AIMS and institutions like that. So we organized the data online. We were able to, thankfully, his data came to us in a digital format. So we were able to organize the data very nicely on Google Drive. And whenever people ask for this, it's all usually free of cost. What we expect them to do is just to mention that, they got this from the SL Bhatia archive, so that, many more people can reach out to us. So answering the questions that were raised before, again, mentioning data management, cataloging at multiple levels. This is something that we did. So just to, I don't know, okay. At multiple levels. So I started using these simple library management systems to catalog. We have around 3,000 books in the library. If you guys have time sometime, please do come. We started using these home library apps through which we started cataloging our books. Excel sheets have been great help. It took me some time to learn, but I have managed to learn how to actually look at Excel sheets and do that. The larger historical value, family archives and academic archives, are they so different? At some level, I do see the prism through which that you see your family archives or institutional archives is not much. As an archivist today, I might actually approach my institutional archive in a particular way through my personal bias, through my personal understanding of the events around me, which might be very different from how an archivist from a different discipline would actually approach the institutional archives. So there was never this question of this versus this. For me, family archives as well as understanding family archives actually helped me a lot in understanding what the institutional archives is and how much does it matter, not just to the institution as such, but also to the people who are there in the institution. Involvement of multiple people. So saying that I'm an archivist, this belongs to me and this is my job has never worked, because we are always resource crunch people. Having multiple partners, whoever is ready to give free service, we usually take it from them. We had a medical student who graduated recently and who had 3 months break before he went to US, and he said, I can actually help you cataloging some of the museum things. I said, yes, come. Free mein to, yeah, any service we just take. And he actually helped us cataloging all the instruments which I did not know the names of. And his father was a doctor before in St. John's. And when he couldn't identify some of the instruments, his father came and helped. So seek help with the family as well as in the institution. It's very important for us to actually talk about your work wherever you go, and then, see to ask for help if you need any. Then is it necessary to personalize an archive that is in nature? This is a conversation that Ishita and I mean, last time when I went to the institute, when she came to the institution also, this was raised. This is a question that I'm still looking at. I'm still mulling over it. And probably I leave you with this, saying that not all questions need to be answered. There can be some things that are with you, and probably you might not be able to do it in your lifetime as an archivist, but can you do it? That's about it. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we can all clap, no? Yes, yes. In this room, we can clap. Over there also, you all can clap. Thank you so much. And I think I'm going to reiterate Radhika's point. Please call for help in different ways. One is free, not free, but in different kinds of projects, we have felt that people just want to get involved. Sometimes everything's become so professional that for a lot of people to come and be a part of projects is usually seen as a matter of honor or a matter of being accepted. So sometimes if you reach out to community members or family members or your next door neighbor, we have had various very kinds of conversations. Wallabi's has been proof to that, where family members have told us, I'm doing nothing. and would you want me to sit and write this down or do this? So, but only thing over there is, of course, again, lowering your guards in terms of technicality, or your guards in terms of precision. Let them make a certain amount of drafts, and then you learn to reiterate and you learn to get it better, and so on and so on. This is especially when you worry so much about, Shwetal, your content. I think there might be many more people who will come and pitch in once you set up the framework out there on the digital platform. Okay, with that, we'll move on to our next presenter. Rukmini, you'll go next, yes?
Before I start, I wanted to say that maybe you could also see my presentation as I guess as the initial archive as well of curating for culture. The first set of, the first set of workshops were not as organized as the 6 months, workshops that came about later. And the 15-day ones were more open-ended in terms of none of us wrote a proposal initially. Nobody had any idea about what is archiving. Everyone was just stuck at home, and equally curious about this thing called archiving. And then there were a bunch of 10, 15 people who came together and just started talking about it. And it started with, why don't you interview the people you're stuck with at home and see what comes out of that? So as a part of one of the first part of the exercises, I was living with my mother the first lockdown, and I thought, why not? I might as well interview my mother and let's see what comes out of it. And I realized that she grew up in Odisha, in a place called Sunabeda, Koraput, and her father worked in HL at that point of time. So, like her, there were many others who grew up in Koraput, and she was telling me about how she grew up with. As a child, she would see a lot of Russians coming to Koraput because they were doing various, projects with HL. And I found that quite fascinating, that, and then of course it started with a personal family archive and trying to learn about how did she move from Odisha to Bangalore. And I tried to do it in a more, I tried to ask her in a particular manner based on where she had lived. So what are all the different kinds of houses that she stayed at, starting from Odisha to Bangalore? And since she also lived in the HL colony in Bangalore, and were there any differences between the housing colony that she lived in Koraput versus the one in Bangalore, and trying to map her experience of this through housing. So I started with, yeah, this is where it is. And so I started with this. I asked my mother to make a map for me of the housing colony that she grew up in Koraput. And I thought it was a nice way to actually learn about her past. In some ways, a map is something that's so accurate. And I think my idea of an archive also always, based on what you also just talked about, there's always this picture of an academic archive where you can always access things where you assume it's accurate. And whereas you realize even with maps or even archiving, it's something that's so subjective. And doing this little process with my mother, I think, definitely made me realize that memories, mapping, and archiving, there's something that's so interlinked. And what you choose to archive, how you choose to archive, that's something that will always be on your mind, regardless of whether it's a personal archive or not. And so, yeah, so I think with most things, when it comes to housing, of course, there's the class aspect that becomes quite obvious. Based on what your designation is, you are given a certain kind of house, and there's a certain layout that is followed across various housing colonies. And that's something that she was telling me about when I first interviewed her. And it carried on to the housing colony that she told me about, about the HL colony in Bangalore, which is very close by to the old airport. So this was my first, I guess, archiving exercise. And it didn't lead forward, but it definitely left me with questions about, if I were to take this forward, how would I want to take it forward? Is it only my mother's story? Am I saying a story about HL? Am I telling a story about public archiving? Who gets to say this story? How do you go about it? And I thought a mapping exercise like this was something that was so crucial to my understanding of it. Do I carry this forward with people who I want to interview later? And would all the maps match? How would that look like? And this could become an archive of itself. I had no access to any archives. We were sitting at home all day. This became my archive. So I had to create an archive out of something that possibly didn't exist, but also existed, but I didn't have access to. And then if I were to have access to those kind of, or let's say if I were to have access to HAL's archives now versus these personal archives, would they match with each other? So these are questions that definitely got me thinking about how I could take this forward. And recently, as a part of the Kitchen to Kacheri thing, I participated in that. And this time it was about the housing colony that I've grown up in, which is the LIC housing colony, which is right here, literally less than 2 kilometers away. And I called it Colony in Motion because I'll come to the story of it. I'm unable to move forward. Okay, yeah. But I realized that every house in my colony, it's a row housing colony. One doesn't really know whether Charles Correa designed it or not. It's very close to the police housing, which is definitely Charles Correa's design because of the terrace housing that it has. But because Correa designed many of the other housing LIC housing colonies, and there's that film Lovely Villa as well, I always assumed that Charles Correa had designed this. And of course, there were some features that were very Charles Correa-like about this housing colony. And I got in touch with Charles Correa Foundation. They had no idea about whether it was actually constructed by Correa or not. And I was thinking, am I, going after a story that maybe doesn't exist? But there's something about this colony that I felt there is a story behind it. I've grown up here. I've seen so many things change here. And I realized maybe the story here is about the modification of this colony. They're all row housing colonies that all look the same, and suddenly now not a single house looks the same anymore. So what's the story in that? And I remember talking to Ishita about it and telling her about it, and I ended up contacting the contractor who has changed all these houses ever since the first colony was built, which was in the late 80s. And then it was open to the public in the early 90s by a lottery system for LIC housing colony holders, policy holders, and then they were all based on this lottery given a different type of housing, whether it's P type, M type, N type, etc. And so I ended up taking many pictures based on all the houses that contractor Thomas, who had modified. And he told me very casually that I think it's somebody else called Thomas who designed it, but it must be based on Korea's plans. But this idea of nobody really knows who designed it, nobody actually cared because the original barely exists anymore. Everyone's modified it to their own liking, and that's something that really fascinated me because maybe even with an archive, we're always looking for the past and the origin of things, but we're also very much in the present and it's constantly changing. So how much does the past actually matter, and can we engage with the past knowing that so much has changed that you might not have one particular route to go to? So for the Kitchen to Kacheri thing, the exhibition there, I just gave various photos that I took of my colony based on what Thomas had constructed and changed. So these are some of the photos of the colony. And it's hard to tell which was the first one. I think which was the first type of LIC colony housing. You can only guess based on whether it's run down or not. And lately I've realized everybody wants a 3-story house because now everybody is renting it out. So much has changed in these colonies itself. And I thought of ending with this because I was looking for a story or trying to figure out how much a colony has changed. And now suddenly I stumbled upon this empty plot, and it could be changed to completely different type of housing and probably have nothing in common with any of the row housing that was present. So I guess we have a lot to look forward to and see how much this colony has changed. So, so I thought of ending with some of the questions of I started with something so personal and then realized that actually it is telling a much larger story. Who am I to tell this story? How does one go about it? And when it comes to the last thing about the LIC housing colony and the photos that I took, is it by curating it based on what contractor Thomas had done? Am I telling the story of contractor Thomas? Am I telling the story of the colony? And how does one do it, especially when something like LIC has its own history and its own archives and different types of housings for different cities, and they all seem to have different narratives and stories. So the reason why I focused mainly on the external facades of these buildings was because I did not want to go into the personal stories of every, of every house, and then it immediately becomes a home, and then it becomes about their personal lives. But at the same time, when you are looking at housing or anything, how can you disregard who lives there? So I would like to take this forward at some point, and I guess I'm also curious about how I would go about it because there are lots of questions to think about when creating an archive. And again, an archive is always made in hindsight, you always think about who can access it and why would they want to access it? Is it really important? What is the significance of it? So these are questions that I'm sure all of us engage with on a daily basis. And but I hope that even though these questions exist, we try and we keep doing rather than speculating so much and then refusing to try. So
Thank you so much, Rukmini. Am I audible over there from here? Oh, lovely. Thank you so much. And I think, again, the point that you highlighted, I think I want to sort of reiterate is the concern about authenticity, which is going to keep coming as many archiving projects or research projects that we all go ahead with. Simply because I think it's time, the generation we are in, things have been written, overwritten, layered. So what is really authentic or original becomes a question in itself. How do we deal with it? We can always come back to it in the discussion time. I'm going to now move to Deepti's presentation.
Tata. This is an archiving project exploring Agastya's grandfather, his life and times through his little eyes. Agastya is now 3.5 years old. And why am I choosing to do this project? Really because I believe that memories make for the most precious legacy anyone can be gifted with. I found this really beautiful phrase that I read somewhere. Nobody can do for little children what grandparents do. Grandparents sort of sprinkle stardust over the lives of little children. And I thought this was so apt in the context of this project. For most of us who have been blessed with the good fortune of having our grandparents around us, what we hold dear most is the memories that we have of them. I certainly cherish memories of my grandparents, especially those with that of my grandfather. And I shared a particularly beautiful relationship with Professor B.V. Srikantan, my father-in-law. Realizing how precious this is, I wanted to preserve everything I could of Agastya's grandfather for him. Sometimes we can never have enough of someone we love and hold dearly. Agastya was only a year and a half old when his grandfather passed away at 94. While there was some overlap and interaction, it was too brief for Agastya to make any lasting memories. The world knows Professor B.V. Srikantan as a scientist, as an astrophysicist, an academician, an institution builder, and a mentor to many. But this particular archive aims at bringing out who he was as a person and his humane side too. As I started on this journey of archiving, I picked up a lot of tools and strange words like metadata, frameworks, oral history, narratives, etc. While they may sound like a bunch of jargon, what they really are very simple, usable tools. And I didn't even have to use all of the tools that I happened to come across through the journey of archiving. The whole journey began with what I found at home, a large bunch of letters in a box, a typewriter, and a lot of books he wrote, books he read, lots of video interviews that when I Googled, things that he used and things that were gifted to him and things that he treasured and newspaper articles that he liked and he made a paper cutting of and kept it neatly filed, etc. So I really had this huge repository of everything that I needed to make to begin this journey of archiving of this project. The next step was to create frameworks, which is nothing but creating a platform on which all the little stories that you want to tell have to be placed on. So I chose the platform of experiences. By experiences, I mean the grandfather's experiences as well as our experiences as a family with the grandfather. Now, this was to provide a very relatable platform for Agastya as a child and in his growing years too, something that he will understand very comfortably. So, what did I pick out for my audience who's only 3 years old? Are the things that he knew of. He definitely knew what parents are, or childhood, and travel because he had just begun to travel. Belongings, this belongs to you, and that is his and mine. Toys, of course. So I had to really bring down a very long, rich life that his grandfather lived into very small bits, and it was very challenging for me. And I only for me to realize that what remains of our dear ones with us are really their everydays. They're very quiet moments. And I would like to use the word non-moments because they're really very trivial, but they are what we begin to treasure most. And a lot of stories have been put away to create material as he grows up. For example, how Einstein was a big inspiration in his grandfather's life, so much so that he wanted to meet him when he went to the US, etc. And what his work meant for him, what his companionship with his grandmother was, and what God meant for a scientist, because he came from a very religious family. So all these stories are put away for a time when Agastya grows up and he begins to understand these things. So this archive will grow as he grows. For me, particularly as a photographer, as I was going through this journey, I had no choice but to look at, to observe. As a photographer, looking at photographs from a different time, from a different place, photographs that I have not made, photographs that even the person that I know has not made, but someone else has made of him, or the photographs that he himself has taken of the places that he lived in, or the people that he loved. And I really wondered what makes these photographs so insanely beautiful, like beautiful truly in every sense. Was it the eye of the photographer? Was it the material? Was it really the time that made them stand out? Was it the vice of today's excesses and the haste of today's time that deprive today's images of such elegance and beauty? This really was a recurring question for me, especially as a photographer and a person who loves looking at visuals. Being an archivist in training, I came across a lot of questions too. Really, while this project was, as a mother, I observed that the companionship of grandparents with that of grandchildren is simply incomparable. There is no other relationship that you can see this bonding that you find between grandparents and grandchildren. So during this process, I really had the joy to step into my son, who's 3, step into his shoes and imagine what I'd really like to preserve of my grandfather. And then I realized I couldn't preserve all that I wanted because of the limitations of life itself. So what really came out of this whole exercise? Since the archive had to be accessible, I had to find ways of putting in the stories into into Agastya's everydays, into his play. So at the time of the project, he really was enjoying piecing puzzles and pictures together. So we made little puzzles which he could explore, little wooden puzzles. And then we also made magnetic photographs with magnets on them so that he could slide and move them and figure out chronology of his grandfather's life. And here he's seen doing this exercise on his grandfather's cupboard. And then I made these little palm-sized booklets, which the child could hold in his hand, exploring 4 different frameworks. I call the first framework Every Day. So really it's about his grandfather, what he did every single day. He woke up, he ground his coffee beans, made his coffee, how he packed his bag to work. He never forgot his bunch of keys, etc. And the second framework was called Everyday Objects that his grandfather used every single day. Um, for example, his sewing kit, which he sewed buttons on his shirts till he was 94, or how he trimmed his nails and filed them very meticulously, or his dentures, which he particularly took great care of because he really loved to eat all these crunchy snacks, and he took care of his dentures. So these are the little stories that I thought a child would find interesting and amusing also. The next booklet, you see, with Agastya and his grandfather, this is all the experiences of his grandfather, which we have captured in photographs as a family. So these were there as evidences for him to know that, these are the experiences that he had while his grandfather was around. And the next one is my personal favorite. It is called the Sensorial Experience booklet, because it really talks about what his grandfather smelled like, what his feet felt like. They were soft, and what are the kind of sounds that you heard when his grandfather was around. Like he liked to listen to a particular rendition of Bhagyada Lakshmi every evening. So on and so forth. It's really about what you would feel like if this person was around you. So that is what I made out of the project so far. But there are many mistakes that I made, and I really like to talk about it. One thing is that I had this huge repository, really a lot of material at hand, and I wanted to use it all. For many, many months, I struggled trying to piece it together. And then I figured that this is not how it works. You really have to simplify it. And keeping the audience in mind was so important. While the material might be very exciting and overwhelming, it's so important to keep the audience in mind. So then you get a better picture, a clearer picture of really what are the stories you can tell and cannot tell. Who's going to look at it? Where is this archive going to be looked at? So it's important to keep that in mind. And how would I like to take this forward? I really believe this is a beginning for me, and very complex stories are waiting to be told, but all at the appropriate time. And perhaps through different tools like audio and various digital platforms, and perhaps open it out to the world to access and to experience as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepthi. Over to you. Yes.
As an archivist, what did I experience? For any archivist, if there is a person like a pure archivist, it would be a delight to come across like a huge box of letters like you have. But when you're also a family member, it's very, very true. Like he said. Okay, what I was saying was that as an archivist, it's a delight for anyone to come across a lot of material, and I mean like a room full of material, really, books, letters, things, clothes, everything. Really, there was everything in the house. And but when you're a family member and you're trying to archive, it's extremely traumatic. And to read letters of a 17-year-old wife to his husband who was away overseas, the one thing that kept coming back to me was that, am I even permitted to read these? I'm archiving, but am I permitted? If my parents-in-law were around, would I dare do this? these were some things that came across my mind. And another thing was it necessary to tell things like, something that is so personal out in the world? Can I do justice to things like death, in an archive to represent somebody's emotion? Can I even do justice? Can I be unbiased as an archivist? So the answer was no. So I really think archiving cannot be objective. It is so personal that had I, like my initial proposal, I had the first proposal that I sent to CPA was to make an archive of all the protests that I had gone through, like as a photojournalist. And when Ishita sent a response to that saying, try picking something more closer to your heart and blah blah. And I said, no, protests are like my life. And had I even taken that up, this clearly is a very personal project. But had I even taken up my protests as an archiving project, I think it would be still very personal. It cannot be from any other eye. So that was something that I also kind of thought about a lot as an archivist when I was thinking about these things. Sorry about the voiceover going missing. I don't know if you even noticed, but that was that. And also, thanks to Sarita, who kind of mentored me on this in this journey, because I was so stuck, because the image of Professor B.V. Srikantan was so huge that it was impossible to, without having to make it very trivial and just say, oh, I love my father-in-law so much and he's so amazing, he's so gentle, without having to just make it very mushy and sentimental and emotional. To build a story was very hard for me. And Sarita really broke it down and she said, think of your audience. And then I said, okay, this is not for my family. Who am I really doing this for? For somebody who's not going to access this person anymore. And that's when these things came about, when I said he has to play with it. He has to live it every day. And evidence is here. Yeah, and he clearly, I have to reiterate this, he said, this is not your material. Your material are the real letters, and he was very clear about this. These are not my words. He said, these books are made for me and I'm going to present them. And you're a photographer, you take pictures of this and you talk about it. So that's where it is. And I think it worked. I mean, my audience has engaged with his material efficiently. And I would like to take this forward by maybe once in 5 years, because rebuild the stories, make these little booklets. I don't know, digitally. Another thing that fascinated me was about how much the family traveled, and stories about when people move. And I think that should be accessible. But making your house a museum is not advisable. Like, I really thought very, I had this utopian idea of, this wall should go like that and that wall should go like, and then I realized this is also a space where I live, and I also have a life to live ahead of me, and I can't keep bringing history into my face everywhere. So it has to be confined to a room, possibly if you're doing a personal history, and if you can afford it, like dedicate a room to it, or even just a wall or a cupboard where you can access. And as enticing as it may be for you to want to make every room talk about everything that was, I think it is not advisable. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Deepthi. Thank you so much. And I think I have to reflect and accept that, yes, when we started this 3 years ago, I don't think I was equipped to see personal and professional. I have to accept. I mean, I've worked with it, but I wasn't able to see the possibilities of it, or perhaps it was a very conscious move that, okay, I was taking my practice into a personal space as a response to the pandemic. So quite a few of you who wanted to work on institutional or practice-based projects, I might have pushed you to think about the personal. And I think happy to say I've also come on the other side to be able to now negotiate how to see personal into practice with participants. With my own projects is very different, but in a workshop mode, how do you engage with personal in the practice? So when I came to SGRI and we talked about it, or if you were now to take up your protest works and we could still work with it. Having said that, I think this whole question is much bigger. So I will leave it with that about subjectivity, about bias, about archivist's point of view versus, so having a point of view versus being neutral. It's a much bigger conversation, and perhaps if we have time today or tomorrow morning would be a better time to reflect on it. But I think it's also a personal discovery for most of us as we grow into the projects. And this is why second workshop will be too early for me to even tap into it. But thank you for bringing it up, because we all need to be very conscious of the subjectivity that we bring along and how much can you marry it, can you make it a part of your everyday life. And much thanks to Agastya, who's come here and made the space very active and frolic for all of us. Thank you once again, Radhika, Deepthi, and Rukmini, for spending time with us this morning. I think me versus me presenting, you actually presenting your projects was needed, and I think everyone else will respond to that. Let's see how we can maneuver questions, looking at the original archives and still do the exercise, right?